Welcome to the Heroic Minds podcast, where we uncover the heroic stories of individuals battling through adversity and rising to the top of professional sport, business, and life. Uncovering the characteristics, the secrets, the tactics to become the hero of your own story, because it is adversity that maximizes human potential. Welcome back to the Heroic Minds podcast. On today's episode, we have John Young, a man born with dwarfism and also an Ironman. He competes in triathlons, marathons. He was raised in a foster home. He's a teacher. He's a basketball coach. He's a father. He's a husband. It may sound silly, but to me, John's the kind of guy you go to for advice because he just gets it. He seems like he's just so full of knowledge about the world. And I'm sure he's full of knowledge as a teacher too, but you know what I mean. So it was so cool to sit and chat with him. And I emailed him after thanking him for taking his time to come on the podcast. And he had said, you know what, it was really cool to have that conversation. It was kind of like old friends catching up. And that's really what it was like. And that was the first time we ever chatted. He just had this awesome ability to talk and share his stories. And he has so many stories. I mean, he's got a funny story about when he's coaching basketball in the States and how he approaches the idea of his size and stature. You know, I'm not even going to ruin the story. I'll let him share, but it's a funny one. He talks about pain and our relationship with pain. And it's so cool and impactful. So this episode is one I'm really excited about sharing. Again, it was one that just flowed, and John just kept sharing stories and ideas and concepts. And I mean, his family was watching him at the Boston Marathon when the bombings occurred. And he talks about going back to the race in the future to then actually finish the race. It's so many different messages mixed into this episode, and I can't wait to share it. But before we get to that, remember to check out truelocal.ca. The feedback from people actually ordering the meat and using the discount code has been really, really neat. Everyone's loved it. I haven't heard one bad response yet from the product. It's all high quality meat, locally farmed, individually packaged, all put into a box with dry ice. So if the box arrives to your house and you're not there for 4 days, the meat stays frozen. They're adding new products every other week. They're growing fast, so give them a try. And there's no obligation to stay committed for a certain amount of months. You can opt in and opt out whenever you want. Use my discount code HEROICMINDS25, all capital letters, to get $25 off a regular size box and $10 off a personal size box. Alrighty, here we go.
I think the difference with me is like at least one of my challenges is very visible. With other people, it can be depression, it can be whatever, and you can't see it. You can't just assume because the outside body looks like this that person should be doing this. And I think also, I do know people with dwarfism that do hide from it, that do kind of, they almost like recede from society, and they might get a job where they're working from home, or they don't have to go out. And part of that just stems from the fact that maybe they had very protective parents. I don't know, but I know growing up in Toronto where I did, my mother and older sisters never let me use my short stature as an excuse. And that was, I think, key to me becoming the person I am.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I had a conversation with a blind piano professor at Laurier, actually just across the street from Waterloo, and very similar, where right out of the gate, she said she never really had an excuse. She was included on everything, and it was never an expectation that, oh, Nicole can't do this. It was, right, which I think plays a huge role. So I guess childhood, I guess you briefly already said that you still did everything or attempted to do everything that everyone else did.
Well, I grew up in Toronto. I was born in the early 60s. And actually, in fact, I actually grew up in a foster home. I was put into foster care right after birth. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that I was born with dwarfism. My mom was a single mother, and she didn't think she could take care of me. And so she put me into the foster care system in Toronto. And at the age of 2 weeks, I was put into a foster home. I very luckily stayed in the same home my entire childhood. I was never adopted. So I remained a ward of, growing up in Canada, you're a ward of the Crown. And so I remained in that system. And I grew up in a family with 3 older sisters and 2 older brothers. The sisters were much older than me, the closest one being 10 years older than me. And so I basically grew up with 4 mothers. And my mom basically said, like, from the start, like, we're gonna have him do the same thing as everybody else. We're not gonna kind of favor him and do things for him. And so, I learned how to get stuff. I had to, use stools, climb up on a chair, all that kind of stuff. And so, and when I went outside to play, I played with my friends. I didn't, all that anyone knew when I was growing up was I would be a little bit slower. I might not be as fast doing something. I might not be able to go as far. But I remember growing up in Toronto, I played at a place called Earls Court Park. They had the Parks and Recreation people there, and I would do all the activities. I played softball. I played handball. I went to the town pool and swam. Swimming was actually something that I really excelled in and really enjoyed swimming. But I had a core group of friends. And I think very quickly they didn't think of me as being somebody with dwarfism. I was just John. I was their friend, and I never let them give me a break in terms of, when we played hide and go seek or when we played tag. I had to run fast if I wanted to catch somebody. Like nobody slowed down or nobody pretended to be hurt just so I could touch them. And I think I look back at that as being real important moments that kind of made me the person I am. I tried really hard never to make dwarfism an excuse. I went to public school. I had some really good public school teachers that luckily were right in tune with my mother. I remember my kindergarten teacher, who, believe it or not, Mrs. Fennell, I'm still in touch with her. She's retired and living in Toronto. Really good friend. And she and my mother basically both agreed, again, we're going to let John do everything like everyone else. And that just went all the way through elementary school. I think middle school was a pain, like it is for every 13, 14-year-old boy. It was hard. Guys were finding girlfriends and I wasn't really, pairing off with people like some of my friends were, but I still had a core group of friends. And, it really, I think when I look back on it, I obviously got hassled from strangers and stuff, and people would say stuff that didn't know me. But all too often, if I was with a group of friends, if somebody said something like, use the word like, hey, look at that midget, which is a word that anyone with dwarfism really can't stand. I couldn't react fast enough. Usually I had 2 or 3 friends immediately, getting in that person's face saying, don't use that word, that's inappropriate, standing up for me. And it wasn't a case of they were fighting my battles. I never felt like, they were doing it for me. I always felt like they were just my friends standing up for me, and I would do the same for them had the tables been turned. And I treasured those years growing up in Toronto very well.
The other thing I liked about what you said about your childhood is that really you were raised by women.
Yep.
Yet you still have this tenacity that people may think, oh, you need to, you have to have men in your life and you have to be raised in a culture of sport that's predominantly male. But you obviously have this unbelievable work ethic and courage and integrity raised surrounded by women, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, like I said, I had 2 older brothers, but certainly the women in my life were much more kind of, my guiding light. And when I met my wife years later, I think she remarks on the fact that she feels that those women really kind of helped make me a lot more respectful of women. And I don't look at, I try to be very, being a high school teacher now, I do my best to treat my students regardless of gender. And I think society is even moving towards now gender even being a non-issue. Like you shouldn't be identifying boys and girls. They're just students. And you try not to kind of say that person has that trait because they're a girl and this person has this trait because they're a boy. And I think I'm learning a lot as we go along. But I really do think that those women in my life really, they really helped me figure out a lot about who I am.
So from childhood, it seemed like you were empowered as a young individual, and this wasn't really an issue as much as one may think. And of course there were the bumps in the road and people that, as we all deal with, and maybe more so with you, was a different issue where people would poke fun or take advantage of a situation. But moving on from that, when you're in university,
I remember when I was at Waterloo, I remember going to the pack and swimming all the time. And I had good friends that were on the swim team. at Waterloo, I hung around with a lot of the varsity hockey players. And so I played some intramural hockey. And so I'd always been pretty active, but I wanted to go back to one little story about going to Waterloo. And I went through what was called the mathematics teaching option, and we had to apply to get into that program. And, you know, as far as I knew, I was the only person with dwarfism that was considering being a high school teacher. I'd heard a lot of stories of short-statured people being elementary school teachers, but never in high school. And I think there was this worry that, you know, high school kids would kind of, you know, be dominating and kind of, you know, what are you going to do? How are you going to tell some 17-year-old boy that he's got to do something? And I said, well, I was now growing up in an age where you couldn't physically intimidate high school kids. You're not allowed to touch them. You can't threaten them with violence. And so, you know, what are you going to do? And I remember my advisor said to me, okay, like, we want to know, like, we've got to pick somebody that's going to be a good teacher. How do you think you're going to deal with kids that kind of come at you because they're, you know, taller than you are? How are you going to gain that respect? And I just threw it back at them. And I said, I had plenty of high school teachers in school. Some I respected and some I didn't. And it had nothing to do with their physical features. It had more to do with how they treated me as a person and how they treated my friends. And the teachers that I respected the most were the ones that also gave respect to kids. And I think I'm going to come at kids that way. I'm going to treat them with respect, and I think I'll get it in return. And I would have to say, and I've been teaching for 28 years now, I've never had a single incident where I felt physically incapable of being a teacher because of my size. And I've never had a student. I've dealt with students that are, you know, challenged with mental issues, physical issues, whatever. And no one's ever said, I'm going to get you because you're this person versus somebody else. So that part was really important, you know, becoming a teacher. But
I'm a huge fan of the idea of respect. And that's the biggest thing I learned from my head coach, who's now an assistant coach in San Jose, which has come up many times on the podcast, this concept of respect and earning it, and et cetera, et cetera. So your first day teaching, or each year when you have a new room of students, what is the approach with, I guess, do you bring up your situation, or is that even a factor, or I don't know. It's just, I'm curious how you would approach that situation. Cause even talking to you now, I can tell you're such a respected individual. It's like, do you even bring it up, or do you even need to?
Oh, I don't need to now so much, because I'm at a smaller kind of school. It's a prep school north of Boston. You know, the kids that come here all come on interviews. And so they're usually here in the spring before they start as a student. So they'll see me and they'll hear about me. And a lot of times they're siblings, you know, they're younger siblings of kids I teach. So it's not so much an issue, but I usually deal with it in a humorous way. And I'll give you kind of an anecdote that I kind of dealt with it. When I first started teaching at the school, at Pingree School, where I'm at right now, I was coaching freshman boys basketball. And so we were going to have our first, and like I said, remember this, I'm living, you know, now in Boston, originally from Canada. And so I said to my kids, I said, okay, before the game, I said, we have to have a little meeting because I want to talk to you about some of the things that might happen. And I said, you know, this is a story. I said, listen, we're going to go to another school, and these people may never have experienced a person like me before. And so it's really important that you guys remain focused on the task. You know, the game is the important part. Don't worry about the spectators, because in the end, what you got to realize is not everyone's heard a Canadian speak before. And the kids just kind of, what? And then they all started laughing. And I said, okay, now what I really mean is, and then I basically said, you know, and they were laughing about it. And that's kind of the way I deal with it. I deal with it more in humor, because I want people to realize that, hey, it's just part of who I am. And then I directly handle it. And I said, if you hear somebody say something, ignore it. Like, if you get angry about it or upset about it, save it for the game. Like, use it fuel for the fire. And I can circle back now and say I use that myself in my training. Like, if I'm out on my bike on a long bike ride, preparing for a triathlon, and some car full of teenagers drives by and somebody yells something out the window, instead of getting upset, it just makes me pedal harder. It makes me realize that I'm going to use that negative energy to fuel my fire and keep me going. And I think that's such a more positive way to deal with the roadblocks that we're going to experience in life.
Right. I love it. I love that. So getting into that triathlon training,
Yep.
So you were saying that you were big time supporter of all the teams at the University of Waterloo, and I'll let you continue on from there. So you were doing the announcing for.
Yeah, for the basketball team, I did that for a couple of seasons for the Warriors. Like I said, I remember I had some really good buddies in the hockey team. So I had a lot of good friends that were on the teams and stuff. But like I said, I was always kind of a spectator, always a fan. And then off I went to become a teacher. I taught in Ontario for 9 years up in the Peterborough area. And then I had an opportunity to go teach overseas. And so in 1999, my wife and I then left and moved to Hong Kong. And so Sue and I lived there for 4 years. And in our last year there, our son Owen was born. Now, my wife also has the same type of dwarfism as I do, as does our son. And so after he was born, we decided to make the move back to North America.
And what brought you to Hong Kong, though?
I was kind of in a bit of a rut teaching in Ontario, and I really was kind of in a bit of a just not happy with what I was doing. It wasn't the kids. I loved where I was teaching. I think it was more the kind of the bureaucracy and the government at that time, and I just needed a change. And so I went to a job fair that was held at Queen's University in Kingston, and this school in Hong Kong offered me a job, and away I went to the other side of the world. And it was exciting. It was great. The money was amazing. So that was a benefit. And there we went. We were there. Like I said, we were there for 4 years. And the funny part was I actually found out that there's a hockey league in Hong Kong where expatriates can play. So I got involved in that. And the rink is actually on the 8th floor of a shopping mall.
No way.
It's a tiny rink. They have no blue lines. No center line, and it's 5-on-5, so only 4 skaters and a goalie. And I played that for a couple seasons, and I had a blast over there.
Oh, that's awesome! That's so cool. So then, then you move back.
Come back to North America, and I got a job north of Boston, and that's kind of like right after we got back. I just wasn't physically active anymore, and being standing only 4'4", it didn't take me long to gain a lot of weight, and it kind of got it. It was its worst probably around 2005, 2006, and I was not sleeping properly. And my wife encouraged me to get to the doctor. And I think the scariest part was I stepped on a scale, and the scale said I weighed 195 pounds, and I was like shocked. And I literally said, "I think your scale is broken." And the doctor said, "No, it's not broken. You weigh 195 pounds." And so I was diagnosed with severe sleep apnea. And so I was given a machine to wear that I actually still sleep with it, only because it stops me from snoring. And so my wife appreciates the quieter sleep. And so but I immediately lost, I think I lost 20 pounds, not even exercising, just from proper sleep.
Wow, that's interesting.
So that, to me, I've been sharing that with people. If you're not sleeping properly, it's a huge part of being healthy. And so I lost that weight. And so I got back into the pool and I started swimming again. And then I borrowed my wife's bike and I started cycling. And then I think one day a friend of mine sent me a video of this. There's a father and son team that live in the Boston area. They're called the Hoyts, Team Hoyt. And the son has cerebral palsy, and the father pushes him in a wheelchair. And they also actually did an Ironman triathlon where the dad pulled him in a boat and then put him on his bike and cycled him on the bike and then pushed him in a wheelchair.
Oh, that's right. I've seen that. Yeah. I've seen that. Yeah.
And so they've actually become good friends of mine, and I've done a number of races with them. But that put the thought in my mind about maybe doing a sprint triathlon. And so 2009, I signed up for my first race. And the interesting part about it is doctors had always told me, because of my dwarfism, that running wasn't a good idea. So I'd never done any running in my life. I think when I did my first triathlon, I'd never run more than once around a track.
Wow.
I literally, I walked most of it, but I finished. And ever since then, I was absolutely hooked after that first race.
Oh.
And so I actually I've done the Toronto triathlon 3 times. I came back and I did a race in Peterborough once as well. They had an Olympic distance triathlon there that I did. And and from that's come a lot of marathon running. I'm actually doing the New York Marathon in 9 days. I'll be back in New York to do that one. And I've done Boston 5 times. And
Holy smokes.
I'm absolutely obsessed with kind of any kind of multi-sport racing now.
So now you are, but initially getting going,
Yep.
because I did as a couple of triathlons, and I feel bad saying it now because when people ask me, "Oh, how'd you do?" I say, "Well, I was way too heavy because I was training for hockey, so I was getting passed on the bike like crazy."
Yep.
And with your approach to the very first time you got into this sport,
Yep.
when you weren't leading the pack, what was that? What's your mindset like when you're going through that race?
I think with me, I very quickly had to realize that I wasn't racing other people. I was racing myself, because, when you look proportionately, my legs are small enough that takes me probably about 2.5 steps for an average runner's gait. My bike, the bike that I have a specially designed custom bike now that's, state-of-the-art carbon fiber, titanium, so it's very light, but the wheels are still only 20 inches in diameter versus 27. So I've got to turn my wheels more to go the same distance. And so I think I soon realized my race wasn't worrying about other people, though. I'll be honest with you right now. And I don't ever, I don't ever worry about this, but I don't think there's been a race lately that I've been the last person finishing. And so, again, I'm not measuring myself against other people, but I know I'm doing the best I can. And I've enjoyed this along the way, but other people that are out there, I think nothing, and it's meant in a good way, I think, but nothing kind of makes somebody shake their head on the bike if I pass them in my much smaller bike going up a hill, and somebody just kind of does a double take and looks at me and says, "Oh my God, that guy just passed me." And I try not to, I don't ever think people are being rude, because it's what they are, because I don't know what their battle is. Maybe they've got, and so I don't worry about it. I don't know what their race is. I kind of stay in my own head, and I try my best to improve each time.
Right. That's wicked. Have you ever had times where you're racing? Because when I watched that video, I keep believing that video because it was like I had shivers the whole time. When there were clips where you were in the middle of the race and people were yelling things. Were there ever times, and I know those races from the few triathlons that I've done, it's quite positive energy. But were there ever times in those situations where people weren't positive?
I don't think I've ever heard anything. I know sometimes some racers are like, they want you to get out of the way. And so if you're going a little slow and you might be a little over to the left in their way, they'll yell at you. But nobody's ever said. I did have one bad incident quite a few years ago involving one particular triathlete in a race, where he actually blogged about me after the fact and wrote some pretty negative comments about the fact that this. And again, he used the word midget. He made a comment about he couldn't believe it that a midget was doing the same triathlon. But when I found out about that, and kind of, I called him out on it, and I wrote stuff on social media about it. The race director actually tracked him down and basically told him he would never be allowed to do any of his races again. And he got a lot of negative backlash. And, the interesting part is he fancied himself a pretty good racer, but there was a story that came out about a year ago where he was found out to be cheating at a whole bunch of ultra distance marathons, where he was actually hiding in the porta potties and not having his laps counted. And so he's been banned from all of these races. And it was the same guy that called me out at this triathlon. And so I've always been convinced that karma comes around and gets you when you least expect it. And I'm happy in the end. But that's the only case I know of anybody that's ever directed anything that I could, that I could actually challenge. And I've had hundreds of more positive situations where, people have come up to me and said, I've got a nephew who has dwarfism, or I've got an uncle who has dwarfism, and I never thought he could do what you're doing. And now I hear about other people with dwarfism who are running and doing triathlons, and it just makes me feel good that, here I am at 52 years of age. So I'm not a young guy, and I'm still doing what I'm doing. And it makes me happy to know that people are out there and doing the, just getting out there and doing their race, like I said, and concentrating on just kind of being better than maybe the race before.
I used to think that the idea of being better than your yesterday self wasn't enough. I thought that there just wasn't enough power to it, because then you're not trying to be the best. But listening to John and listening to so many other people on this podcast, there's actually a time and a place for that to then build, because you have to build a strong base before you do get to the top. So the way I approach it now, and even after hearing John say this again, when you're trying to be better than your yesterday self, it's not every day you have to do that, but there's a time and a place. And at a point when I'm trying to be better than my yesterday self, I'm setting myself up for a clear goal, something that I can attain. Whereas if I just try to be the absolute best all the time, is that a clear-cut goal? Is that a clear stepping stone I can take? And there are steps we have to take to get to the top. So some days, I'm going to be better than yesterday, and I'm going to reach that goal. Other days, today's a day to push it. I'm just going to do everything I can. I'm going to work my tail off to be the best and get it all the way to the top. But I think we need those days where it's a step back. Let's be better than yesterday. Let's be better than yesterday. Let's build that base. I used to think this meant I wasn't trying as hard, but that's not it at all. It's just changing that mindset, changing that mental approach to the situation, giving yourself a different view on how to chase this goal or whatever it is you have in your mind, and to stay foot on the gas mentally thinking I need to get to the top every day, I'm starting to realize isn't necessarily the right approach. There's days where you got to change that mindset, challenge yourself in a different way, approach a challenge in a different way, be better than yesterday, succeed, do the same thing the next day. Then maybe we take a couple of days to chase the top.
When it comes to your inspiration for other people, one thing that comes to mind for me is your son. So what is, I assume you're empowering him to do things just like you grew up, but I guess what is he into, and what is your approach when he says he wants to do something, or I guess your relationship that way? Or do you have him on the bike as well?
It's my wife and I kind of, we've always been ones to kind of, like, both of us grew up in a situation where we didn't have any, like, I want to say role models. Like when I was growing up, I didn't have somebody with short stature that I looked up to and said, I want to be like that person. And my wife didn't either, besides maybe her own mother. Her own mother was a great person, but there wasn't somebody out there like in society. And so my son is now, he runs cross country at school. He runs track, and really enjoys it. And I look at the fact, like, that to me is the greatest joy, because I would never have thought of being a runner when I was his age. And so he's already on that road to, I think, leading, hopefully will be a healthy lifestyle. He's got a core group of friends. When I watch him at his cross country meets, he runs his heart out. He's much faster than I am already. So that brings me total joy. Like, he likes to rub it in my face a little bit and tease me about it and say, hey, Dad, I'm faster than you. And I'm like, you should be. I don't know of a single 52-year-old father that's faster than his son. So if you weren't faster than me, we'd have some trouble. But I look at him doing that, and it brings me such joy that he's out there doing his thing, and I think my wife and I could not be any prouder.
I know today everyone loves to compare. So they'll say, I'm anxious, but I'm not as anxious as they are, because they're dealing with the death of their, whatever the example is. So I shouldn't complain because it's not as bad, but everything's relative. So it could be as bad, right? Yep. So whether it's on the bike and you're doing the same race as someone else, I know you said you position it as you're racing against yourself of your best time. In life and other issues or other challenges that come up, how do you conceptualize that conversation or that message in your mind? Even coaching a basketball team, which people would probably judge. What is your approach to knowing that your challenges are a little bit tougher than other people?
I think if you start to break down your life like that, I think you end up I think you're going to internalize everything, and you're going to end up just beating yourself up. And I really think that in my mind, it's more about the journey than the finish line. It's more about what did I learn along the way to get me to where I'm going. Even if it's a task at work, like even if you have to do something at work, it shouldn't necessarily be the finished product that you're measured by. It should be kind of how you got there. and what did you deal with to get there? And that's kind of like when somebody sees me running a marathon, they're like, oh, you really did like a double marathon. And I said, why? And they said, well, you took twice as many steps. And I said, I did, but these are the legs I was born with. I can't change them. I can't have different legs. And so I have to do my job with the legs that I have. And so I try my best to kind of not cut corners and make excuses. And if like I said, you can take everything in your life. So if he's going to compare my legs to his legs, then you've got to do that with every athlete. Then, and I've seen some runners that are excellent runners that are really tall and some that aren't very tall. And I don't think you can compare body types. And so I know it's going to take me longer, but like I said, I think if I spent my whole life breaking every task that I had to do into, okay, here are the tools I have, here are the tools they have better tools than I do, well, then it's not even worth doing. Because that's what I would end up saying. It's not worth doing because I know I'm not. It's like taking a really good hockey team against a real, a team that isn't really good. Well, we know we're going to lose. So then let's make a different challenge. Maybe winning the game isn't, maybe stopping one of their penalty kills. If we can stop one of their power plays or whatever, great. That's a win. Like, you have to break it down and look at those little wins, like I said, as the journey to get there, as opposed to that end result.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. It's yeah. See, like that's what I feel like. Even I'll fall into that. I think we all do, unfortunately, with this overstimulation of social media and whatnot.
Yep.
It's that if you worry less about the finish line in comparison to when someone else gets to the finish line, but just your end goal. That's I like that a lot.
Like I've done a couple of races where I haven't been able to finish. I did a marathon a while ago, and I only got a half marathon done, and just my body was telling me I had to finish. And so I stopped, and right away there's this feeling of failure. Okay, I failed. I didn't do what I wanted to do. But in the end, like, there was a reason I stopped. And maybe finishing the race isn't always like the prize that you need. And so, in my mind, it was maybe my body was telling me I had to stop. Maybe if I kept pushing, maybe I would have collapsed. Maybe something would have happened. I don't know. But if you only think that end result is it, and I think it's more so if somebody comes back to me later and says, "Oh, I heard you only did a half marathon in that race. That sucks." And I'm like, "Well, it does, but I'm not going to measure my success against what you think. Like, you're not, that other person isn't going to tell me whether I succeeded or failed." And I think the word failure, I kind of only use that word if I don't even attempt something. In my mind, it's not failure. It's what did I learn? What did I learn from this? How am I going to go back at it again next time and be better prepared, as opposed to failing?
I really liked this point. And that's why I had to add my own 2 cents here, is that we all know the saying, you fail to prepare, prepare to fail, et cetera, et cetera. But hearing John say it that way really, I guess, reminded me the idea that it's not redefining failure. It's that, okay, I failed, right? It's part of the journey. But what happened was I was actually given an answer when I failed, is what I'm realizing. I was given an answer of, okay, that didn't work. Here's something that might. Here's 3 other options that might. So now I'm getting answers each time I fail. Regardless of the size of the failure, you're going to have answers in front of you. Some might make more of an impact than others, but regardless, when we fail, we're being told something. And it's going to be our mindset at that time when we fail of, am I open right now? Is my mind open to realize and learn and take something from this? So now I'm more prepared next time I get to this point. And that's all it is. I heard a saying the other day that the road to success is paved by our responses to failure. And so how strong is that road going to be? Well, it all depends on how you approach each failure. The more you learn from those failures, the more your mind is open and willing to learn from those failures, the stronger that road's going to be, the longer that road's going to be, and the more likely that road's going to lead you to success.
Maybe I just didn't get the success I wanted to, but I certainly didn't fail. I learned. And as long as you learn and move forward, you're good.
Yeah. And obviously you have done that, because for you to do what you do, you have to push your body to the brink. So even though that time you did have to stop, I mean, look at all these other situations and all these other races and runs and triathlons and all the other events you're doing where you are able to. That's awesome.
I think part of it came with, because I've been doing this so much, I think my body was feeling things that I'd never felt before. And so I knew something was up. It wasn't the usual pain, because if you know, like when you run, it's going to hurt. It has to hurt. Like that's part of what running is. And the pain of injury versus the pain of use are two very different things. And so when my body's just saying it hurts, another part of me is saying, yeah, but keep going. You're fine. Keep going. You're fine. And you know that. And if you do it enough, you'll know what your body's telling you. And if your body's telling you to stop, I know my wife is happy that I listened. The last thing she wants is a phone call that I'm at the hospital because I've pushed my body too far.
I am so excited that you just said that, because that's going to be I like to bring quotes into the pregame speech, and we play tonight. Okay. And that's going to be my quote: the pain of injury versus the pain of use.
Yep.
I love that.
There was when I did the Boston Marathon, I just did it this last year when the weather was so terribly bad. And I actually had one of my fastest marathons ever. I think growing up in Canada has made me pretty hardy to the weather. And I remember when we got to the start of the race, everyone's wearing 5 layers of clothes. And I just have on a long sleeve shirt, my running singlet, shorts, and I was ready to go. And everyone's like, aren't you going to be cold? And I said, no, once I get running, I'll be fine. And I remember when I got to mile 20, part of me wanted to slow down. And I just kept saying the same thing in my head over and over again. You're not injured. You're just tired. Keep going. And I just kept saying that in my head over and over again. You're not injured. You're just tired. Keep going. And it kept me going to the end. And like I said, I ended up with one of my fastest times ever. So I think the mind is a very strong thing. And if you can kind of deal with your head and all the parts of your head that are telling you to stop, you'll be fine. I
have a question on that, actually, because I've been trying to run. My buddy and I, who's been on this podcast a couple times, he was a philosophy major. He did his master's in business, unbelievable guy. And he helps to shape these messages. And we always have these deep conversations. And one of the things we talk about is this outer body experience where you put together a plan beforehand. And this actually came up in an episode I just did with a neurosurgeon. You have this plan, but then you separate yourself from the situation. And some people can do it, some people can't. I think it can be a learned kind of experience. And then that allows you to do nothing but just the task. You take out the emotion, you take out the anxieties of, will I do this? Will I not be able to do this? And you're able to now handle the pain in a different way. And it sounds ridiculous. I know it does, coming out of my mouth, even hearing myself say it. But when I was trying to do this run, we were both trying to do it, the time to get into the Canadian military is 1.5 miles in 8 minutes, which is, I believe, to be 11.2 miles an hour. And I lift all the time. I think, and my immobility in my hips, I think, doesn't help. And so I literally, for 8 minutes straight, right after 30 seconds, I'm already just at my peak, and I just have to keep turning my legs over. And I've been, the last couple times as I'm pushing, trying to get to 11.2, and I'm at about 10.9, 11. It's this crazy moment where if I can get to this point where I block out, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. I don't think I can do it. This hurts. There's a mirror in front of me, and I've been able to just look at myself in the mirror and try to look. It sounds crazy. This is ridiculous. And look into myself, and it just separates myself from all those thoughts. And all of a sudden it doesn't hurt as much. Mm-hmm. I wondered if you've had situations like that. And I assume with how far you're able to push yourself, you have some type of experiences like that.
I do. And for me, I think, and I get a lot of, a lot of runners disagree with me. I never run with music. I never run with music unless I'm on a treadmill, because I find a treadmill awfully boring. I can't deal with a treadmill without music, but I always will run without music. And I listen to my breathing a lot, and I listen to my feet and how my feet are hitting the ground. But there are a lot of times where all of a sudden I kind of think like, where did that last 5 minutes just go? And I'm more, not so much that I'm concentrating on the task, but I'm almost like taking my mind somewhere else. So I'm not even where I am at the moment physically. And I think that's when I have those moments and then come back to my body, it's almost like, oh, I want to go back there. I got to get back to that place, because when I was at that place, everything was awesome. And I think that's a big thing for me. And there's also, you know, going back to that pain thing, and this kind of expression came from something that somebody asked me once when our son was very young. Somebody said, "Oh, does your son suffer from dwarfism as well?" Like, they were asking me, does he have it? But often the medical community will use the word suffer. They'll say, "Oh, the child suffers from muscular dystrophy," or "they suffer from this." And the moment they said the word suffer, I thought, what an interesting word to use, because I don't think I suffer from dwarfism. And I think now I've kind of brought that into running, and I've always said, pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. And I honestly think that you're going to feel that pain, but how you deal with it is a choice. And if you want to wallow in it, and you look at those runners that are at a late part of the race and they're like feeling like hell, you can tell that they're suffering. And I try really hard not to get to that place. And smiling is a big thing when I'm running. I try and keep a smile on my face. I try and pick a location that's way down in the distance, and I focus on that location. And I say, I'm going to get to that place. I'm not going to worry about anything else but getting to that building or getting to that stoplight or whatever. And then I pick a new place to get to. Or I pick out if it's like a big race, like when I'm doing New York in a little bit more than a week, I look for spectators and I try to lock eyes with fans, and I look at people and I smile, and they'll, I have my name on my shirt, so they'll yell out, go John," and I high five them or whatever. But I try to kind of not be thinking I'm running. It's more, I'm just enjoying what I'm doing, and I'm out greeting people or whatever. And that part of me, again, it's a way that I take my mind out of what I'm doing.
That's so cool. I love the fact you said you wanted to get back there too, because even though it still doesn't feel amazing, pain wise, because it hurts to push your body that far, but in your mind it feels so good that you're there, kind of thing.
I think it's that runner's high. I think it's like, I don't know if it's the endorphins that your body's releasing or whatever. It's something in my body when I get to that place, and it's like, oh, I want to be there. I want to go back.
Yeah, totally. And another cool, I mean, now that we're on these quotes, one that I think is going to end up being the title of this episode, because to me it's pretty badass, is your quote, "Be the hammer."
Yep.
I don't want to snip it. I want to hear the whole story.
Okay. What happened was, in 2013, I ran the Boston Marathon and didn't finish because of the bombings. And my wife and son were actually at the finish line and witnessed the initial explosions, but they weren't hurt. But obviously they kind of saw the mayhem that kind of happened after, and they were taken away from the site. And I was about a mile or so from the finish line. And so, we never reconnected until we both got home that night. And it was a pretty awful, time in the community here. People had lost their lives and people were injured. But I kind of, after a few weeks had gone by, I said, I want to get back to the marathon. I want to run it again in 2014. And so they let any runner that didn't finish, we automatically got put back into the race. And so I kind of said to myself, okay, I'm gonna do this race and finish. And I remember, talking to my wife and son, do you guys want to be at the finish line, or do you want to be somewhere else? And they both agreed that they wanted to be at the finish line again. And so, we knew it was going to be safe and they'd be protected. And so they were at the finish line. I started my race. Unfortunately, I ended up getting sick, and I'm talking violently ill. Like when I got to mile 10, I couldn't run anymore. I vomited. I had to go to the medical tent. I started feeling feverish, and what I found out happening was I got the flu, and just what an awful time for it to come full circles when I was in the middle of doing the race. And so at mile 10, I pulled out of the race, and a bus comes by and picks up all of the runners that can't finish. And so I'm on this, quote unquote bus of shame, going back to the finish line. And I called my wife and I said, I'm sorry, I got some bad news. I got sick and I can't finish. And so I get to the finish line, to meet up with them, and I'm visibly upset, and I'm crying, and I'm emotional. And my wife says, what's wrong? And I said, I wanted to replace all of those bad memories from 2013 with good memories, and have you guys see me finish and have it be such a special day like it's going to be for all the other runners. And my son, who at that time was, I think, 11 or 12 years old, just looks at me and says, "Hey, Dad, sometimes you're the hammer and sometimes you're the nail. Today you're the nail." And I just thought, oh my God. I said, "Where did you come up with that?" He goes, "I read it in a book." And from that expression, "be the hammer," was kind of born. And so now it's like my hashtag. It's like it's written on the back of my running jersey. It's actually painted on my bike, and I get so many friends now in that race, and they'll have a bad race, or they'll have a race where things didn't go so well and they had to kind of dig deep, and they'll say, I was really struggling, and then I thought of you and I said, "Be the hammer." And so it helped push me through. So the fact that message is getting around and it's kind of helping other people is it means a lot. It really does.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how smart your son is there at 11 to be the source of inspiration needed.
Yep. And he said it in such a nonchalant way. Like, he was like, "Hey, Dad, whatever, bad day, too bad."
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's true.
Yep.
Are there any other things in your life that this is obviously impressive and very well documented. Is there any other challenges that people thought you couldn't have done or shouldn't do, similar to where the running started, is, hey, you shouldn't do this?
Well, like I said, I think teaching was one, like I said, but it was quickly kind of dealt with. And
yeah,
I've never had any instances like that. Like, I think a lot of times there's physical limitations that people are concerned about, but I try to tackle them head on, and I tend not to be an observer anymore. I tend to kind of get right. If they introduce some new kind of machinery or something at work, I'm immediately the first person that says, "Let me see if I can work this out." I don't kind of wait and sit back. And where I work is a great place. The school I have here, the kids are amazing. The faculty are great. And I think what I like is people don't kind of step up to help me all the time. Like, they wait for me to ask. If I can't reach something, I'll just say, "Hey, I'd rather ask a 17-year-old boy, can you reach that for me?" as opposed to dragging a stool over, because I know I can do that, but I don't need to. But I can't think of anything in that respect that's kind of related solely to kind of my stature. I really can't anymore.
I ask those questions, and then after I ask them, I think, why am I even asking this? Because these individuals, and again, I related to Nicole, who's the blind piano teacher, who was also a competitive swimmer and competed for her country at one point.
Yep.
Like, I asked that question, and she said the same thing. Like, maybe you think it would be tough for me, but I don't. It's not an obstacle. It's not something I have an issue with, and I think it just plays into what you let your mind think, or what your thought process is. Is this even a challenge, or do you approach it as the finish line isn't important. It's the process of just the task at hand. So I think that's neat. So you're running in 9 days, you said?
Yeah, I'm doing the New York Marathon on November 4th, and I'll also be running Boston again in April.
Holy. So what's your schedule with teaching? Is it the morning, or is it both, morning, afternoon?
I teach morning and afternoon. I actually do a lot of my for some strange reason, I've gotten along through life without a lot of sleep. And I think it freaks out my doctors that I do this, but I usually only sleep about 5.5 to 6 hours a night. I've been like that my entire life. And I can't seem to sleep anymore, even if I try. And so I do a lot of my training early in the morning. I'll get up at 4:30 or whatever, and I'll hop on my bike down in the basement and spin on my bike for an hour. With my teaching schedule, I'm usually done most afternoons around 2:30, 3 o'clock, and my son hangs around after school for his sports commitment, and so I'll go out the door. And in fact, when we're done here, I'll be out the door in 15 minutes to go for a run. And where I teach is it's a area north of Boston. It's a rural area with some horse farms and stuff around, so there's not a lot of traffic, and there's a nice state park. And so I'll just go have a run, and it's really a pleasant place to run in the afternoon. And so I try and do most of that either, like I said, in the early morning or right after school. It works out really well.
Cool. So before we finish up here, selfishly, if I'm trying to so right now I'm at 11 miles an hour for 8 minutes, and it's tough because it's probably the farthest even in the triathlon, like you push yourself, but it's a different kind. Like you're not redlining it as much. It's almost redlining. This is like you're redlining it for so long. If I wanted to get 2.2 miles an hour faster, what do I need to do?
I don't know what. I could look at your nutrition. I could look at your shoes. I could look at all sorts of stuff. But it like you said, you do a lot of lifting. And so if you've got a lot of muscle mass, I would probably actually work on, seriously, I would consider doing some yoga or some other kind of work that might get your muscles moving in a different way, and it might actually help your running gait. I know a lot of runners that were really skeptical about yoga, and when they started doing yoga, they became much faster. I also would look into a type of running. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called chi running, CHI. And it's a type of running it's very different from traditional running, and it's based upon these ultra distance runners from South America. And I've done a little bit of reading, and I've adapted my running a little bit using that style. And it basically involves you leaning a little bit more forward as opposed to kind of like leaning back and having a longer gait. It's kind of, you lean forward and shorten your stride a little bit. And it's you actually are using gravity to help pull you. And there are runners that run ultra distance, and also sprinters and fast runners that use it. So I would maybe look into that a little bit. But I would bet that for you, if you've kind of reached a point where you're plateauing and you can't seem to get any faster, I would bet it's something, I would think, more to do with your physiology, possibly. Like I said, to do with like working some muscle groups and maybe doing some yoga to find out kind of what you can maybe release.
Or I just hide in the porta potty and keep the time going, and then.
We're done. If you Google that, you'll find out all about this guy.
Oh, I'm going to. John, this has been unbelievable. I hope we chat again soon.
If I'm ever back in the Waterloo area, I'll certainly look you up and we'll maybe connect and have a beverage.
That brings us to the end of another Heroic Minds podcast. Please keep the comments and feedback coming on all these episodes. I encourage the constructive criticisms. I encourage the comments on the episodes. Any feedback is greatly appreciated. It's so cool to see, and it's really cool to continue these conversations beyond just the podcast. As everyone knows that's been listening, is that I want to have these conversations that no one else wants to have. So that doesn't only mean on the podcast. So thank you for those that have reached out, and I encourage more to do so. I'm Ben Finelli. This is the Heroic Minds podcast. We'll talk again soon.